This is about the evolution of the noosphere, as you already mentioned, towards a 10th turning experience, and it's basically focusing on a dialogue between the two of us. The result of the dialogue was this book on the history of experience, which was just growing when we met in 2017. And needless to say, meeting Brian was a big inspiration for me. We will see why later on. So the evolution of the noosphere and its relationship with the history of experience. So that's my topic today. But I would like to begin with a little theoretical prologue, a preface, which is about a new approach and a discovery. The new approach is basically very simple, but it came as kind of a surprise to me myself, because I had an interest, due to the study of Hutcheson's philosophy, in what experience is. And I looked at the concept of experience for many years, only to find out that I never got an answer. Why was that? Now, if you look at the way people deal with experience, it's like you deal with a pineapple. You know, you always ask yourself, what is that? That is a pineapple, and that's the content of my experience. Everybody is sort of focusing on the content of experience. But this doesn't answer the question, what is experience? Experience is not the pineapple, but it is a way that we get in touch with the pineapple. So the way we participate in things. Like when I say, I see you, Paul. Yeah, I see you, Paul. You are the content of my experience. But the way that I get in touch with you is by seeing. Now, you are now my pineapple.
I'm an artichoke.
Yeah, you'll rather be an artichoke. Good. Good. So, what this is all about is a change in perspective. So if you ask the question, what is experience? You look for an answer about the structure of experience. If you ask the question, what do we experience? You are looking for the content of experience. And that was what everybody has done since antiquity, looking at the content of experience. And that's what I've done. I've added a new perspective, looking at experience itself, how it works. There's not only one way of experiencing, like seeing. There's another one. When I've seen the pineapple and close my eyes, I can still see with the closed eyes in my mind. So I have an imagination of the pineapple. So we already have two, sensual experience and imaginative experience. This is reproductive. We have creative experience as well. And there are various kinds of experience, various kinds of how we participate in reality, like with seeing, with hearing, imagination, consciousness, self-reflection, and so forth. Then the discovery was, that took me one step further, is that the general assumption is that experience has been the same all over humanity's history. What I found out, it wasn't all the time all the same. The answer is no. The various dimensions of experience emerge only one by one in the course of history. So that takes us to a history that starts in the Paleolithic and is extending to the present day. And is covering altogether 9 turns of experience that I've come to call this. So we have 9 turns of experience when in the history of humankind, the way we get in touch with the world we live in, ourselves, and whatever might be there out in the cosmos. So I will give a brief overview of how that works and show how that relates to the evolution of the noosphere. Actually, the first shift the first turn in the history of experience occurred somewhere in the Paleolithic. And it's the change from information processing to conscious perception, which you need for tool production and satisfaction. So what is happening there? It's when you go to information processing, you just have a stimulus and you have a response. You don't need any consciousness with that. So if you see the pineapple and you are hungry, you just grab it and eat it. When this turns into conscious experience, into conscious participation in the pineapple, we have a conscious perception of the pineapple, and consciousness introduces a pause between what I see and what I do. So we have time for reflection and have a choice of what to do. So we may see the pineapple and either say, well, I eat it right away, or I take it with me, or I'd rather have a tool to cut it into two halves, makes eating much more easier. In the sciences, this process is called decoupling. When you go to historic neuroscience, there you get this concept. So there is a pause between the sensual impression and the reaction to it. So this is the first stage in the evolution of the noosphere, when consciousness intervenes in how we relate to the world. But what is missing in that moment is we have no records of what happened at the time. There are no symbolic expressions for that. So there is no way of people at the time. We have technical artifacts, but no symbolic ones. So the next turn in the history of experience is the turn to imagination. You can easily see that emerging when you look at the early stages, or the late stages of Neanderthals and the early stages of Homo sapiens. Then they start to draw pictures. So this is a picture from the cave of Lascaux, where you can see bisons, horses, and deers, all sort of painted to the wall. Actually, a process that takes usually sometimes something like 10,000 years. It's not like a decorated place that has been done in one big stretch, but it evolves slowly. So adding a piece, another deer, another picture of an animal every 300 years at the average. Quite interesting. It's not a museum. It's a growing artwork over many millennia. And to do this, people had to develop a certain method. So this kind of painting that we've just seen, you cannot do it just from scratch without training. So what people need is they need to have some spare time to get educated for doing that. So you have a new kind of relating to reality, that is, you can reproduce what you have seen by your imagination, and you have to learn the process of how to reproduce it. So we have a 4-step method that is readily available and has to be trained with people to learn how to draw a picture. So first you have to look for people who are interested in doing that, because not everybody is capable of doing so. Then they have to learn the technique. Then they have to do some training. It takes usually for a normal student about 3 to 6 years to become a professional artist. There's a lot of things to learn here. Then you have to do field studies, because you have to learn how to remember things that you have seen in the field and then take it with you into the cave and reproduce it on the wall. So it's a very complicated process. This is the second stage in the evolution of the noosphere. So we first have conscious perception, and then we have conscious, explicit imagination. But what is missing? And this is quite interesting when you study all these caves. There are no groups of animals that are located in an environment. There are no stars, there are no clouds, there's no water, there's no rain, there's no ground. there is no context. That's what the Paleolithic studies call episodic memory. It's just an episode. So when I see a pineapple, I paint a pineapple, but I don't paint the pineapple in a landscape with the background and other pineapples to the left and to the right, in the rear and the front. It's really astonishing that you only have these episodic representations of things that have been isolated from their environment, and they have no relationship whatsoever amongst these others. Very rarely you have 3 deer, for example, or 4 that move in one direction, so it's one episode, but there's no general story. It's just things, that are represented. So what is missing here is a sense of order. And this comes only when we go from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic. So one of the earliest representations in terms of work of art we have here from Berkeley, and it's quite obvious if you look at this representation, it's totally different from what we have in the Paleolithic.
Where is it from?
That is in southern Turkey. So here you see, in the middle of the representation of the picture, of the relief, you see birds that are obviously living in a river. There are fish, there's something like stones, there are reeds in the background, there are strange objects close to the riverine, there are reeds in the background again. If you go down to the lower part, you see crabs. So it's a representation of what is going on in the river. It's not an isolated animal anymore, but it's animals in an environment. So they have a location, they have an orientation, they have a background. There's a certain order that's emphasized by the various strata of this stele. And you have the same when you look at architecture. In former times, before the Mesolithic, you have only huts that have been built occasionally as a shelter. But here you first, in the history of human beings, you have constructions that follow a geometric and orderly pattern. So here the main pattern is a circle. This one is old, now 12,000 years, so it was built in 9,700 before our era. And one of the major symbols that applies to this kind of architecture is a circle in the center. So that's the basic idea of order. And you have the basic idea of order in a different way in the mythology that emerges during the same time, where you have the cosmological stories that always are following the same patterns, starting with primary matter, out of which the gods are created. Then you very often have a fight among the gods, with a victory of one side. And out of this comes the creation of the cosmos, the creation of humankind, and the establishment of order. So you have similar patterns all over the world, which is quite surprising. But it's not by cultural contact, but because the discovery of a sense of order has a time and a space dimension. So you have to order everything in time, what we call history, and in space, what we call astronomy or whatever else. So this is the third stage in the development of the noosphere. But what is missing? The narrative of cosmic order you can discover worldwide, but what you don't have is an author. The cosmic order stories, they come from the gods themselves. They are not a creation by human beings. And there's nobody responsible for these stories. This comes in the next step, the discovery of self-reflection. That was actually the stage when I discovered for the first time that there is a change in the structure of experience by having this experience myself. At that age, I was 12 years of age and was using the binoculars of my father to look at the stars. I was totally immersed. I love the stars. I was looking at the Pleiades to the right. And then I was shifting over to Orion to have a better look at the sword, at the nebula in the sword, which you cannot see with naked eyes. And when I was turning from the rest to the live, me being the stargazer, I out of a sudden changed perspective. I was looking at the stars, and out of a sudden I was looking into myself and discovering that it was me looking at the stars. If I don't look at the stars, there would be nobody to see them. I was really shocked by this shift, this turn in experience, and ran over at the night to my parents in the neighboring room, where they would sit and watch TV. And I said, Mom, there's something strange happened. What is it? I said, I was looking at the stars and then I was looking into myself. And she said, well, that's not such a big surprise. It happens to people in that age. And she said, it happened to me as well. I said, when was it? She said, it was when I was milking our goat. I said, huh? Yeah, I discovered that it was me. I was a person who was responsible for milking the goat. I was not just thinking about the goat, but about me milking the goat. And my father joined in and said, it happened to me while I was doing math. Very typical. He was a brilliant mathematician. He became a navigator. So the reflection of the self is turning inside yourself. It's a totally different experience, which can be subdivided into self-awareness or introspection and self-agency, that you are responsible for what is happening. The first one who ever left a record to us with change in the perspective was a Iranian prophet Zarathustra around 1400 before Christ. And there's a text, a very crucial text, where he reports his name for the first time. He identifies himself as the author who is inspired by an approach from his major goddess. So Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, asked him, what art thou? Whose art thou? And then I say to him, first I am Zarathustra, support, praise, and extol thee, O wise one. So there's a dialogue between a responsible person, and he becomes responsible for reforming religion. That's his task. And that's what prophets do. And there's one more interesting change that Zarathustra had managed to do is he presented his people with a method to acquire the same capacity of self-reflection, because he inspired everybody with 3 words to repeat what had happened to him. The main creed of the Zarathustrians is that you have to think about good thoughts, about good words and good deeds every 3 times a day. So it's a repeated process of methodical self-reflection that becomes part of this religion. It's the first religion where that happens. So we have 4 stages in the history of experience and the evolution of the noosphere. But what is missing? It's quite simple, When Zarathustra reports his reform of religion and approaches his people, the knowledge that he presents is still coming from divine sources. It's not his reformation, it's the divine mission that he is on. So we have no responsibility for experience and reflection. And that comes in the next shift, when the eye of reason is discovered, what I call the noetic turn. Actually, there are people connected to this turn, which is people that we all know of: Solon, the Athenian, Protagoras, Plato, and many more. So it happens in a period that is called by Jaspers the access time. The real happening, the real innovation of the access time is not the content of the access time, but this turning experience, the discovery of the eye of reason. And Plato's analogy of the cave is a reflective representation of the turn itself. You're probably all familiar with a little story in Plato's Politeia, but I give a short summary of that. So you're here in a cave where people are looking to the wall and they're sort of fixed in chairs and cannot turn around. And all they see is the shadows on the wall. It's like people, looking at the smartphone every day. It's the shadows of the real world. We have just heard about this morning. And then they are loosened up and turned around, and they are facing the real world, from which the content of the iPhones are produced. And then they say, oh, that's the real world. and they get an impression of what is going on there. So what they see is there's a light in the background, and there are original ideas, and from these original ideas, by help of the light, which is ignited by the goddess, Apollo, you can see the shadows of the walls. You get an overview of what is going on in the different levels of reality and how they all are related. And what we do not have to miss in that picture is the author, the reader, and the audience. The author, the reader, and the audience. These are the people who have discovered, the eye of reason, because it's not the people that are sitting there in the cave who represent the eye of reason, but it's Plato, and you, and me.
This is the real world here?
That's a real world.
I turned around.
So take a So we are on the same level as Plato, because we are participating in the turn of experience. We get the overview of the different kinds of experiential relationships, of participation, of seeing, of imagination, and so forth. So that's what we have here. The fifth stage in the evolution of the noosphere. And then what is still missing? It's we have experience and reasoning, but the nature of spiritual experience is still unclear. So we are looking for the spiritual turn next. In the history, how am I doing in terms of time?
It depends on how much more you want to do. I'll give you a 5-minute one.
Okay.
I would say you have 10.
Okay, so I have 10 now. The spiritual experience was explained in 4 different models. The other side, something close to me, the distant goddess on the hill, the hidden god somewhere in the abyss or in the darkness or in heavens, and then later on comes God as a spirit, as pneuma, the Hagion Pneuma Spiritus Sanctus. That's what we need when we go ahead to the next turn in experience. What is happening here is that the human being is a pneumatic soul itself, it's a spirit, and the transcendent God is a spirit as well. That's why we can relate to each other. But in this case, the relationship has to be started from the divine side. It's not something that we can do. Now, what is missing in the end is the 3 ingredients of modernity: creativity, consciousness, and the unconscious. That will take us to the present day. So, the discovery of the imagination was done in the 12th century by a guy called Richard of St. Victor and became popular in Renaissance days. Consciousness was popular with Buddha already. It became popular in Europe by René Descartes, the cogito ergo sum, the cogitans, the thinking thing, that is consciousness, as he explains it later on. And Schopenhauer was the one who was discovering the reverse side of consciousness, the unconscious, that was popularized by Friedrich Nietzsche and Eduard von Hartmann. It's a mythology, a modern one, that it was discovered by Freud. What Freud did is to develop a method how to get into that. So altogether we have 9 discoveries in the history of experience, and then we met, and Brian asked me, and what comes next? I've never thought about it before. That's the final stage of what I'm trying to explain today. Our dialogue. And Brian said, is it necessary to stop with 9 transformations of experience? I said, no, there's no evidence to that. So which one would be the next one? And we started this dialogue in 2017. So it's 6 years from now. And we have come to an answer just 2 weeks ago. In preparing for that conference. I don't refer to all the, attempts that I made before. I just go ahead to my future perspectives. What is the evolution of the noosphere heading to? And it's not, as I think, to more machines, but it's another turn in experience. So what's the threshold that we are standing at the moment? Because it's not quite clear what the next step would be. And to make it clear, it's just a sketch, it's a proposal, it's a speculation, and you have to decide if that is convincing. What were we doing here? It's how can we extend our spiritual participation there? Because the noosphere and Teilhard de Chardin's writings suggest that there is an ever-increasing complexity and a new dimension coming when we are closing in for the omega point. And somewhere in between, there must be a new extension of spiritual participation in the noosphere. That means nous or pneuma or spirit, which is later in the end all the same. So what we have so far is a participation in the transcendent divine spirit, but what we don't have is a clear idea how we participate in the immanent, in the cosmic spirit or pneuma or nous. But what we know is that if we want to participate in that, we need a common substance. And that's an idea that Teilhard suggests because he thinks that all parts of the cosmic reality have to some extent a noetic, a nous, a spirit, a pneuma part in it. So the approach would be using consubstantiality, so similarity in substance, as an approach to find out what we are heading for. So I just referred before to the consubstantiality in our spiritual participation in the transcendent God, but the same applies to our spiritual participation in the noosphere, in the biosphere, and the geosphere, because we have the same substance all over the place. So what we do is we resonate in our experience in the cosmos as an animated and living being. So what is this kind of resonance? In a structural way, it's just a word, an index, and a label for the particular kind of reference of participation that happens between us, ourselves, and all the parts of this cosmic entity, the cosmic whole. And we have decided we might call it resonance because it's one of the words that's most fitting to make clear what is happening here. But actually, it's not that strange anymore, because if we look at how we translate this resonance in our everyday life experience, it's empathy or sympathy, it's love, openness of mind, or what Jung and Pauli called synchronicity. So people do the same things even if they are apart. It's always like my wife is calling me whenever I am just looking for my mobile. And we do that all the time at the same moment. It's really strange, but it happens every day. So this is not a new discovery. We have the same when we look at Buddha, at Plato, at Jesus, at the Stoics, St. Francis, who is preaching the birds, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin himself, and James Lovelock, there's only the dot missing. And they are all referring to the experience of a living and animated cosmos, the cosmic ecosystem. I don't go into the quote from Plato here. They give you the time to take a photograph if you want to. And actually, we already have a methodical approach how we can open ourselves to that process, to that participation that was developed by the Stoics. So, how to approach the participation in the cosmic regions? It's called by the Stoics archaeosis, making yourself familiar with. That's the English translation of it. And they have already developed, that's just an explanation of the world. The goal of this is the cosmopolitan, which is not a politician who is traveling all over the world, but the real meaning of the cosmopolitan is that we are inhabitants of the entire cosmos and we are part of it, and we have to experience this, and we have to be sort of familiar and part and friendly with the rest of the cosmic entities. So it is a step-by-step method which starts from ourselves, then extends to the family, then extends to our friends, then to the community at large, to all humanity, to the earth, and then to the cosmic whole as the overwhelming totality. So we already have, from very ancient times, a method And the challenging question is, why has it been lost? And I leave that to a discussion. Thank you.
Resonance. Can you tie that to, or can you say that would be a form of thinking on a spectrum, or it's in the far end and thinking is on the distant other end? Is there continuity that ends in resonance?
Well, I think the method that we use, the Stoic method of familiarization, that's a kind of thinking, you know. You have to think about what you are doing to apply the method. But what you are looking for is a kind of experience. It's not thinking. It's
No, I know. I didn't mean, is it thinking? I mean, is it from thinking? Is there a continuity there? Thinking is one thing, resonance is a different thing.
Yeah.
But I think they're related.
Yeah, sure. You know, if you look at the 9 turns of experiential turns, you know, at the 9 stages, they are all related, because you don't get to the second stage unless you have already been through the first one. You don't go to the 9th stage to discover the unconscious if you don't have consciousness. And you don't get to the last one without reason. So you're right.
Thank you.
Paul, we'll follow up on that. Resonance you use and attunement you use. Sounds like music.
Yeah.
So go back to the first step, the primal artichoke. You meant pineapple. You said pineapple.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see a pineapple or an artichoke and say, I could eat it. Someone has to give it to me, I think. Usually my first food comes from a maternal. And she often may croon, she may use music, she may sing to me, say, oh, ooh, good. So I want to bring that participation up, really bringing in the maternal element of the cosmos. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you're right. The example that I use in the book here is a language, for example. You know, language is a capacity of learning. Language is a capacity that is sort of indigenous to our brains, but it works only when somebody talks to us. So we need our mothers, our fathers to talk to us and to transmit to us a cultural product, which is language and words. And that's the same for all the other stages as well. They are all part of a civilization, of a culture, and that means they all need training. You know, but if I go to all the details in a short presentation, it would take half a week. But you're totally right. You know, when you look at the several stages, they all represent a new kind of culture. So you have a symbolic culture, you have a rational culture, you have a spiritual culture, you have a culture of consciousness, and they all need training to become part of everyday life, and they don't just pop out in you autonomously. So it's always part of a family, part of a group, part of an entire civilization. We have heard this several times in the presentation over the last 2 days.
So Sophia and Charlotte.
I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. I love the fact that when you were describing the phenomenon of self-reflection through your own experience, you involved the body. Your self-reflection as a dimension of the noosphere arose in the moment of when you turned with your binoculars to something else. And same for your mom. It happened to her the moment she lifted the goat. So I find that fascinating. I really want, in a nutshell, to describe how the noosphere arises from the biosphere. It's kind of a nice example. And what you just spoke about, your mom saying, good, this was much more a bodily expression than a verbal expression. It was the sound. It was the sound of the body that was so appealing in this moment.
Yeah.
So I just really enjoy
Yeah, all the ontological levels, they are all interrelated. You know, the geosphere, the biosphere, and the noosphere. The one that it's the noosphere is not a realm of ghosts. You know, it's a realm of human beings. And the human beings are not a realm of living stuff somewhere floating around in an empty universe, but they are living on the earth, and they are living from the earth.
And it's so nice to kind of stumble into this in this very, very concrete way that you both just did.
Thank you.
Professor Sean Kelly, thank you so much for that talk. First of all, gratitude for the talk, and especially at the end where it all came together with this. I wasn't aware of this oikiosis term, and you're contextualizing it anew in your interpretation. I'm going to be referring to it from now on. It's not a plug, but it's just, it's a synchronicity. It's so in tune with my relatively recent book, Becoming Gaia. Gaia is our oikos. So just gratitude, and I hope that we have a chance to talk further. I want to give you a copy of my book.
Here's mine as well.
Oh, great! Great. Well, we'll take a book. A little question: the carving in Göbekli Tepe. I'm wondering if we can also see it not only as episodic, but as symbolic. I'm struck so much by how the figure of that bird-headed figure with either the skull or the ball seemed to anticipate Isis with the wings spread, for instance. So do you think there could also be a proto-hieroglyphic, or at least symbolic, not merely episodic?
No, you're right. The difference of Göbekli Tepe and Lascaux is episodic memory, and there we have semantic memory. That you don't have it's not only words, but it's sentences. It's a story, and we don't know the story behind the paintings on the wall in the caves because there's nothing left from that. It's just the episodic moment that there's a cow or a deer or whatever. But there's a story behind what we see in Göbekli Tepe. It's animals in an environment, and they are facing in a certain direction, and they have a certain position that makes sense, and so forth. So that's semantic memory, semantic symbolism.
I have many more questions, but I won't ask. Margot.
Based on kind of the comments that have been made, I'm almost thinking that this diagram that you have here is inaccurate and based on your own experience, because I don't think we can get to a point of connection to all humanity until we get a connection to Earth and nature. In your sense of the stars, etc., I've had similar experiences as a very young child, and that awareness and sudden connection to my place in a relationship in the universe. So I would say that needs to come much earlier because it is formative for a child. The other thing I wanted to comment too, and this is the first time I've noticed this because I've done a lot of studies as an art teacher, the piece that you have of the Lascaux Caves, there's one section of it in which one of the bison is a 3/4 view, which is very unusual because we usually credit that to the acceleration of perception into the Renaissance with Da Vinci and 3-point perspective. So this one down here in the lower right-hand corner, that's a 3/4 view of a bison. It's not a flat, which is what we see in almost all art before that. This is actually a 3/4 view that we don't see until the Renaissance in modern term art. So I just wanted to point that out, that that is evidence, scientific evidence of a much more accelerated sense of perception very early in the Paleolithic that did not start in the Renaissance era.
May I directly answer to your remarks?
Yeah.
You're right. This is my representation of the Stoic procedure of familiarization is just being based on what I could find as illustrations in the internet.
Yeah.
It's not a critical conception of ourselves. It's one of the next steps that we have to do. Are all the steps correctly, aligned? Is it first Earth and then humanity, or the other way around? So you're right. And what you talk about, the representation of that animal here in that picture, which is really astonishing. That actually was one of the discussions that I had with my teacher, Eric Vögeling, that triggered this study. And he would say, you know, we have a sequence of coming from compact to more differentiated, and that applies to art as well. And I would say to him, no, it doesn't. He said, huh? Why not? I said, let's take up, he had a lot of books on that at the time, in the mid-70s. And we were talking about this picture here. And I said to him, look at that. This is more advanced in some respect, like compared to medieval painting or antique painting, because we have different perspectives here. But we have, you know, realistic representations of animals, which don't show up until you go to the Renaissance. So there is no direct line from some simplistic representation to a more complicated one. And he said, yeah, you're right. So my approach, my method doesn't work. I said, no, it doesn't work.
He accepted it.
He accepted it. Yeah. And he said, do you have a proposal what to do? I said, not yet. And he said, yeah.
What you said kind of made me think, you know, it's interesting. So what you describe really, in a way, is a conscious architecture of the noosphere. If we add an unconscious architecture, then I think the order is slightly different, because the child, you know, I think of Merleau-Ponty, primacy of perception. The child encounters the world first of all through the body, you know, through the senses and the body as a whole. So I just enjoy this idea that there are maybe different ways of different perspectives from where to look at this architecture.
Sure. You know, what I have done is a historical study. You know, so I go into the phylogenetic perspective. So how did humankind develop these various stages one by one? If you come to you and me today, and to your kids, or ours, or whatever, then we change perspective and look into the ontogenetic. How does the individual acquire all these various dimensions step by step? So what we do when we educate and we help our kids grow up, then we repeat the phylogenetic, you know, dimensions one by one, and we use all the ingredients, sometimes systematically, sometimes, you know, as it is fit, you know, for the need of a little child, of a baby, of a grown-up. So it's all different. It's a totally different perspective on the same history, but the history applied to an individual life, to a biography. So I'm totally with you, but that was not the content of my study. We should write another book about this.